Hey guys, today we're going to be in Genesis 13 and 14. So we had talked about in Genesis 12 that Abraham went to Egypt, asked Sarai, his wife, to say that she was his sister, which is a half truth. And we've learned that lies that just don't hurt you; it hurts anyone that's involved in that. Okay, so then Abraham he leaves. The Pharaoh tells him, he scolds him. He says, "Get out of here. Take your wife and all your belongings with you. Get out of Egypt." So Abraham went. So let's find out what's going on. Chapter 13, verse 1. Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him to the south. So Lot came along with Abraham. And Abraham was very rich in livestock. So there's nothing wrong with wealth. It's the love of money. You can be poor as dirt, but if that's where your love is that if that's where your heart is, that is the root of all evil. The love of money, not to be rich. So it's okay to have money. It's okay to be wealthy, but it's how you perceive that. It's if you make that your idol. Okay. So Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journey from the south as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning. So Abraham came from Egypt, and he came back to where he was. So if you stray from God's word, go back to where you were with God, where God talked to you, where you talked to God. Just stop that path, turn around, and go back to where you came from. Go back to your first love. Remember where you came from. And so Abraham went back to the beginning between Bethel and Ai. Bethel means the house of God. Ai means a heap of ruins. So, sometimes we are between God's house and a heap of ruins. Sometimes we get into the worldly stuff. And sometimes we're in God's house. It's just, we dwell in that place. So just pick a place, choose. To the place of the altar which he had made there at first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. So he returned from Egypt. He came back to where he was right with God. Abraham's a young Christian, a young man of God. So Abraham, not even a Christian yet because Christ hasn't died, but he is a young man of God. And he is learning. He's still on the milk. He's learning, but he is walking. He is going. And even though he messes up, he comes back to his first love where he had built that altar, and he calls on the name of the Lord again. So that's what we need to do. We need to follow that example. We need to, when we mess up, when we stray into an Egypt somewhere, we need to remember where we came from and go back to where we were. Okay, so now we're on verse 5. Lot also went with Abram, had flocks and herds and tents. So Lot had a lot of stuff too. Now the land was not able to support them, that they might dwell together. They had so much of possessions that, is starting to cause a little bit of strife. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. The Canaanites and the Perizzites then dwelt in the land. So the problem is that they have too much stuff. They're too big. They cannot dwell together because there's not enough space for them. So they're going to have to separate. Okay, and in the meantime, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, they're in the land. When you say that you love God, you're walking in his ways, you are a Christian, and you're going to heaven and all this stuff, there's unbelievers in the world, in the land, that are watching you, how you handle yourself, how you handle situations. And when you mess up, go back to your first love. But they're watching. Don't ever forget that they're in the land and they're watching you. They're watching how you handle things. So, all right, so we're moving on to verse 8. So Abram said to Lot, "Please let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. So Abraham, it's his promise. Abraham could have chose, but he gave Lot the choice. He told Lot to make a decision. Wherever you choose to go, you go, and I'll go the other way. Because Abraham was a man of peace. He did not want there to be strife. Okay, so he's given Lot the choice of where to go. So we're going to see where Lot chooses and where Lot's heart really is. Okay, so verse 10. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go towards Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east. And they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. So Lot lifted up his eyes and saw, he looked with his eyes. That's where his heart is. He's seeing the world. Abraham went with God. Abraham looked at God, looked to God, looked for that, where God wanted him. He humbled himself before the Lord. Lot looked at the world. He saw that the plains were good. And did you catch this? Like the Garden of Eden and like the land of Egypt. Lot may have followed Abraham out of Egypt, but Lot's heart was still in Egypt. Lot still wanted Egypt. Like that saying goes, you can take a boy out of the land, but you can't take the land out of the boy. Okay, so I'm just making that up, but it's something like that. But anyway, so Lot, because of this, when we go against God's will, when we go somewhere that we're not supposed to be, there are consequences to that. You're forgiven, but there are still consequences that have to be, that come along with things. Okay, so Lot wanted that. So he chose, and he went, and we're going to see the degree that Lot falls, because at first it stops and he sees with his eyes, and this is where he's going. He sees this plain, he sees this land, that how awesome it is. But Lot, he pitches his tent even as far as Sodom. He's not quite in Sodom yet, but he's going to get closer, and eventually he's going to be one of the main people in Sodom. So Lot, you taste sin, you see sin, you see it with your eyes, and it looks good. And then you look at it and you think about it, and you inch a little bit closer and closer and closer until you're just smack dab in the middle of it. You might even be a mayor of it. You might be a president of the sin. So who knows? But let's just see the progression that goes. So we're on verse 14. Well, let's back up here. So Sodom and Gomorrah, it was very, very, very wicked. It was exceedingly wicked. Okay, so they did not serve the Lord. So really, Lot was a tag-along Christian, tag-along believer. He just went where Abram went. He didn't care. He just went. And he saw that, God was, it was Abram's nephew, but just because someone goes to church with you does not mean that they trust the Lord. They could be just a tag along, so anyway, so let's go ahead to verse 14. And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, and the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him. So God, we don't know, it doesn't say that God really talked to Abram between Egypt and here, but after Lot separated from him, because God told him to go alone in the first place. So after Lot separated from him, that's when the Lord spoke to Abram. And God said, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all the land which you see, I give to you and your descendants forever. And I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length, its width, for I give it to you. So God's making Abram a promise. He's going to make his descendants so many. And remember, Lot and Sarah are not young puppies, and they have not even had one child yet. But yet here God is saying that you're going to have so many descendants that if it were possible to count the sand of the sand of the beaches or the stars of the sky, then you could number your descendants. But if you can't do that, you're going to have so many. So God's making a huge promise here. And then he tells Lot to look north, south, east, and west. I'm giving you this land. Go walk in it. God promises many promises throughout the Bible. And one is, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And there's many, many promises that God gives us. And he tells us, I'm giving this to you. Walk in it. Walk knowing that you are an heir to Christ. You are bought by the blood of Jesus. Walk in that promise. Don't just sit there. You walk in it, and you just know, and let others know how much God has promised you. And it's not just to you alone, it's to anybody who would accept that, who would want that. So don't just sit there and not enjoy the promises of God, because they are so awesome. Okay, so he told him to do this. So then we're on verse 18. Then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth tree of Mamre, and which in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Okay, so Mamre, however you say that, means fatness, which are in Hebron, which means fellowship. So he's in the fatness, the fellowship with God. Haven't you ever noticed that when you haven't read or stayed in the Word or had that relationship with God for a while, how dried up you feel, how skinny, how like you're starving, and like it's just a very dry place. But then you just start reading the Word, you start talking about God, you fellowship with God, you praise Him, you worship Him, you love on Him. And don't you feel full? Don't you feel fat? Don't you feel just fat with the love of God? It's an awesome place to be. So let's go on to chapter 14. So it came to pass in the days of, now here we go with some kings' names, and I do not really know how to properly say them, so forgive me, and if you can do better, please just let me know. And I'm sure you probably could. And it came to pass in the days of Amphil, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admon, Shembemir, king of Zomim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor. All these joined together in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Chedorlaomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. So the 5 kings are Shemites. They're descendants of Shem. And the 4 kings are descendants of Ham. They're Hamites. Okay, so the 4 kings, they were enforcing like like in the big cities, you see these movies where people have to pay a tribute, I forgot really what they call that, but to have your business there, you have to pay these gangsters money to be in business. Well, this is kind of what they did for 12 years. These 5 kings paid tribute to these 4 kings, and they got tired of it, and they're like, no more. We are not doing it. So let's see what happened. In the 14th year, Chaldemir, the kings that were with him, came and attacked the Rampham in Ashroth Karanim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Eman in Shaveh Kirathim, and the Horites in their mountain of Seir, as far as El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Then they turned back and came in Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and attacked all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwelt in the Hazon Tamar. And the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zebulun, the king of Bela, that is Zor, went out and joined together in battle the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of nations, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Ariat, king of Elazar. 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. So now he's dwelling in Sodom. He's just not on the outskirts of Sodom. He is in the city. So we see the decline and progression of the sin and the decay that comes upon that, and eventually death. Okay, so the asphalt pits there in Sodom, if they would have caught on fire, they would have burned for months on end. So now Lot and all his possessions are in captivity. So let's see what happens. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram. Now Abram, the Hebrew, he is a man of peace, okay? He tries to keep peace. He wants peace. Remember he said, okay, Lot, there's some strife going on now. I don't want that. I want peace between me and you. So now here comes someone to tell him that his nephew has been captured. So let's see what he does. Okay, so then one who escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees, and Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. So Abram had allies, okay? Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Okay, so Abram, a man of peace, loves peace so much, loves his family very much, that sometimes he chose to fight for them. Sometimes we have to choose to fight for that very thing that we love. So Abraham chose to go get his servants, 318 trained servants who were raised up in his own house, was trained for this sort of thing, and they went as in pursuit as far as Dan. Then he divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So we brought back all the goods, and also back his brother and Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people. So Abraham went with his 318 trained servants and brought back all of the stuff that they had stolen. These are 318 trained servants that were born in Abraham's house against these 4 kings, these 4 armies. They did not do that. God did that. God fights the battles that when we're in right standing with him, and it's the battle that comes against his loved ones, the